En este día de Navidad, 25 de diciembre de 2016, murió George Michael, el cantante británico. CNN lo acaba de confirmar en forma independiente. Él saltó a la fama como miembro del dueto Wham! Murió a los 53 años en Inglaterra. Se encontraba en su residencia, según informó su publicista. La policía dijo que no hay circunstancias sospechosas en torno a la muerte. Nuevamente, el famoso cantante británico George Michael, murió hoy a los 53 años. Esto lo confirma en primera instancia la Asociación de Prensa Británica y cita un comentario de su publicista que ofrece este comentario. Con gran dolor confirma la muerte del querido hijo, hermano y amigo George Michael, que murió en forma pacífica en su casa este día de Navidad. La familia pide privacidad y que se respete esa instancia en este momento difícil y este tiempo muy emotivo para ellos. No ofrecerán mayores comentarios en este momento. Su nombre real era Georgios Kyriakos Panayotou, hijo de un greco-chipriota que emigró a Inglaterra y se casó con una británica en ese lugar, aunque George Michael había nacido en Gran Bretaña.
Police were called to a property in Goring-on-Thames shortly before 2 p.m. Christmas Day. Sadly, a 53-year-old man was confirmed deceased at the scene. At this stage, the death is being treated as unexplained but not suspicious. A post-mortem will be undertaken in due course. There will be no further updates from Thames Valley Police until the post-mortem has taken place. So the statement concerning the family said it was over the Christmas period that George Michael died. The police actually saying they were called 2 p.m. Christmas Day and describing the death as unexplained but not suspicious. There will be a post-mortem. Ian Halperin is a journalist and author who has written extensively on contemporary music and musicians. He joins me on the line now from Miami in Florida. You know, I was saying earlier Ian, that he had his demons, but this is certainly a shock to anyone.
Yeah, Michael, first off, you know, I've covered the pop music, the greatest icons, everybody from Celine Dion to Michael Jackson to Prince. I just participated in a documentary on your channel on CNN on Prince and Whitney. This is, for me, the hardest to come to terms with. Is it shocking? No. If there was a candidate for anybody who in the music business to lose their life at a young age, it was George Michael. As you alluded to, he had a lot of demons. And with George, you know, he definitely suffered from depression, other ailments. He was the candidate, but he also possessed unequal talent. Nobody ever conquered the R&B charts up until him and dominated it as a white artist and spanned so many genres and possessed such moving songs that just last forever. And I'm just heartbroken. And I'll tell you, 2016, Michael, has not been a pretty year. We lost Lemmy from Motorhead. We lost David Bowie, Natalie Cole, Leonard Cohen recently, Alan Rickman. I mean, it's just been a horrible year. But as far as George is concerned, it's a tough one to come to terms with, because George Michael, one thing nobody could deny, sure, he had all kinds of terrible incidents over the past 15 years, but the talent, nobody that I've ever seen possessed such a wide range of songs and different genres and so much energy on stage that people just embraced for decades.
There's a couple of things that sort of stand out, you know, for me when I look back at it. I mean, the evolution from, you know, Wake Me Up Before You Go to you know, some of the songs off Faith and Listen Without Prejudice, those albums where he really wanted to be taken seriously as a songwriter, yet at the same time he always stuck up for pop as a genre.
Yeah, I mean, look, nobody he reinvented pop. Pop was pretty much dead up until George Michael, and he brought it back to epic proportions. I have to say, the loss of his mother several years ago really left a void in his life. She died of cancer, and he really never got over it. And there was a lot of personal issues he fought with, and you know, nobody should be embarrassed. Like, depression is such a prevalent disease in society. We should bring it more out in the open instead of hiding it. And George, became somewhat of a recluse the last couple of years. He was seen sparingly, and it's just so sad. Nobody I've seen, all these artists today, kudos to them, the Lady Gagas, the Biebers, but let me tell you something, they're nowhere near in the same class, the same talent as George Michael.
And why was that, Ian? Because I know one of the things that stood out on the Faith album was how he played. He not only wrote and produced every song, he co-wrote one song, but he wrote and produced every other song on that really successful album. But also played a lot of the instruments. I mean, there's an enormous talent there, a depth of talent.
Yeah, Michael, that's a very good point. As I consider, I guess I consider myself now a music expert because I'm also a musician and I've written well over a dozen books on the music industry and I've produced and directed many movies. I have to say, in my lifetime, there's only been 2 artists that possessed incredible musicianship, vocal, and the creativity behind the whole process. And it's Michael Jackson and George Michael. Michael Jackson and George Michael, if the band made a mistake, they had such incredible, intent ears. They'd hear the mistake right away and say it in a nice way. It could be a trumpet player, it could be a guitarist making a bum note. They would call them out right away. That's how big his musicianship was.
And what about those that sort of the demons? He had some troubled times in his life. I mean, you go from those sort of carefree Wham days, and then you look at Faith as an album, and I certainly remember it growing up. It's an album about broken hearts and mistrust and things like that, and he does talk about how those lyrics reflect his life.
Yeah, unfortunately, just like Michael Jackson, George ended up a lonely human being. Yeah. And, it's sort of like the clown in the circus. After they take off the makeup and go home, they're all alone. And that's pretty much how George lived his life. He admitted he was lonely, he felt alone in the world, and really, you have to give him kudos too. He took on the music industry for years. He had a bitter breakup with his record label, and just like Prince, Prince and George Michael are the 2 pioneering artists who really put it to the music industry and never backed down, no matter how much money they lost. But at the end of the day, it took its toll on him, and really, that's why he turned to drugs. He was arrested for possession of Class C drugs. He pretty much smoked pot, cannabis, every day he consumed it. But, that's the artistic life. But, for a man who gave so much love to this world, on Christmas Day, and Merry Christmas to you, Michael, and everybody at the great station of CNN, but it breaks my heart on this day how a man who gave so much love to hundreds of millions of people around the world could just end up so depressed, lonely, and it ends tragic. It's a tragic loss.
It's a great point, and it's incredibly sad. And a lot of people perhaps who didn't sort of grow up in those halcyon days of George Michael don't realise how big he was. I mean, he at one point in the 80s was outselling Prince and Michael Jackson.
And Madonna.
And Madonna as well. It was in 2004 the Radio Academy named him the most played most played artist on British radio from 84 to 2004. That's 20 years.
Yeah, that's a long span. And let me point out how talented this man was. Let's put in perspective. You never saw Madonna, Michael Jackson, or Prince, and they were amazing artists. I consider Michael Jackson and Prince just incredible. But you never saw them cross over and dominate, for instance, the country charts, okay? But you saw George Michael, and this is monumental, to cross over to the R&B and go number one.
Yeah.
It's incredible. That's like playing basketball and jumping over to football. It's almost the same. It's just unheard of.
Yeah.
And that's how talented this man was.
What was his, a part of that sort of wrestling, do you think that he wrestled for respect in the post? I mean, his music was always fairly pop anyway, but I mean, some people would say that, you know, he had a lot of soul in his later material as well.
Oh, he had amazing soul.
Yeah.
I mean, the African American community embraced him. It's unheard of. It's unheard of. That's how powerful this man was. That's how talented he was. And on stage, come on, nobody could lift a crowd more than George Michael and move a crowd. He could, with a pop song, he could move everybody off their feet. And with a ballad, he could make a stadium cry. That's how he interpreted so well a ballad. And again, I think the loss of Princess Diana was a close friend of his. They were friends for years. And then the loss of his mother, I think that did him in, and it left him lonely, because those were two of the closest people to him. And I think he felt very alone in this world after that. And really, he knew his time was coming, unfortunately. I don't think that he had the same drive, the same love of life as he once did.
The other thing that sort of strikes me is that he's a very intelligent guy. I mean, he managed his own career. He knew what he was doing. He knew when to leave Andrew Ridgeley and strike out on his own. He managed most of his business affairs for a lot of his career as well.
You know, you make a great point, Michael. He had to. He had no choice, because he was ripped off like so many artists for so many years. So George Michael, a true genius, a veritable business guy who, you know, his BS detector was so high when he'd see those royalties coming in, and they'd all, you know, they'd all be in the red, because the record labels would charge them for the limousines, the meals, the hotel, etc., and then the artist ends up with nothing. He took on the music business, and he stood up. And every artist breathing today who receives a royalty check, whether it's for publishing from one of the publishers like ASCAP or BMI or whatever, or performing, owes a thank you to George Michael. Because if he wouldn't have stood up, I'm telling you, these artists would still be exploited in perpetuity. And
yeah, I mean, it really is. Do you think it's a shame that there wasn't more like, and he did do the Symphonica tours and things like that. That was sort of in 2011 or whatever. Do you think it's a shame that there wasn't another album, you know, another Faith?
From what I understand, though, my sources told me just shortly before I got on the phone with you that there is dozens of songs that have been unreleased. He did record a lot of material that he never released, so I presume that eventually this music would be released, and I hope it is, because anything that George Michael touches, I buy, I consume. He is just that talented. And really, as much success as he had, I don't think he ever got his proper due, because the drugs, the problems, that was making the tabloid news more than his music, unfortunately, the last decade and a half. And I think at the end of the day, the music will live on more than those demons that you attributed it to.
Do you think he had the respect of his peers from your knowledge of the industry? I mean, because he certainly wanted that.
I think everybody was jealous and intimidated of George Michael. And at the end of the day, it's a dog-eat-dog business. And honestly, shame on a lot of the contemporary artists, because I'll tell you one thing. In any business, in broadcasting, what you do, you always have to study and acknowledge the people before you. You just can't come along and think you're the next thing, best thing since sliced bread. And any artist out there, I think these young artists, they don't do their homework. They're not like the old artists, like who used to study the people before them. Even though people say the Rolling Stones ripped off Little Richard, Chuck Berry, they acknowledge them, the Stones. They did their homework. Today's artists just come along. They don't acknowledge greats like George Michael, and they just think, you know, they're entitled to be number one in the world in music. And let me tell you, without the pain for gain that George Michael did and coming out and admitting he was homosexual and taking on the music business, let me tell you, these artists today would not be making the money they make, and they wouldn't be leading these pretty lives they do. And as far as socially conscious goes, ever since the days of George Michael, Bob Geldof, what have we seen recently? The world at war. I mean, if this was George Michael in his prime, we'd be seeing, you know, for Aleppo, benefit concerts.
Yeah.
We see nothing today. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the social consciousness of artists is zero today. All that they want is to buy a new Ferrari, have the newest apartment, and, you know, as much bling as possible. And shame on today's generation. And any artist listening to this, if I was you, if you don't know who George Michael is, go buy all his music and listen to it for the next week, and you're going to get a lesson in how to craft a pop song and how to interpret a song properly, because George Michael was the master of interpretation. The way he approached the song is unequal. Nobody I've seen could interpret a song the way George Michael did.
Yep. Ian, no better person to have on to talk about the legacy of George Michael. Ian Halperin, author, thank you so much for being with us to talk about this tragic news. George Michael dead at the age of 53. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with more.